It's 1889. The World Fair has just started in Paris, and we all know what was most famous about the Eiffel Tower. By the way, it looks like a great metal detecting bait, right? Being a trademark for Paris for more than 130 years, Eiffel Tower collected many interesting stories in his past. As we all know, he was planned to be demolished 10 years after, but they gave him some new purposes such as meteorological lab, radio tower, which helped French army to intercept radio signals in World War One, and maybe saved Paris. But let's start from the beginning. Although Tower carries the name by his creator, Gustav Eiffel, originally Eiffel didn't design it. The tower was designed by his worker, the designer Maurice Coquelin, and this is his first sketch. In August of 1944, as the Nazis were losing control of occupied Paris, Adolf Hitler commanded his generals to level the city, and plans were drawn up to mine the Eiffel Tower with explosives. Thankfully, Allied troops swooped in before the order could be carried out. On the Eiffel Tower, you can find champagne bar and the post office. Do you know that Eiffel Tower moves? The massive iron structure is wind resistant and will sway during a storm. But the wind isn't the only thing that can make the enormous tower move, though. The heat of the sun causes the iron to expand, making the tower grow a few centimeters during the summer months. Joseph II, the Holy Roman Emperor. He ruled for 25 years in late 1700s. Here on a map, you can see the borders of Habsburg monarchy in his time. And as you can see, he ruled many countries, such as Prussia and Bohemia in that time, Austria, Hungary, Slovenia, pieces of Netherlands, Denmark also. Joseph traveled a lot, visiting almost every corner of his country and neighboring countries as well, maintaining good relations with neighboring rulers. It is recorded that he traveled a distance equal to the circumference of the planet Earth in his horse-drawn carriage. He traveled under the name of Count Falkenstein in order to hide himself from people, which was a little bit easier at that time, unlike today. During these travels, Joseph saw many problems among the people, so he introduced many reforms, one of which was the Edict of Tolerance. An Edict of Tolerance is a declaration that states that members of given religion will not suffer religious persecution for engaging in their traditional practices, which until then was not a practice in Habsburg monarchy, where they forbid other religions than Christianity, including forbidding ownership of real estate, houses, land, or education for members of another religion. The introduction of this declaration into practice took some time due to, for example, the situation in Bohemia, where the Catholic leadership, wanting to preserve its union, printed this edict only in German language, knowing that members of other religions could neither read nor speak German. cannot see here because I left my glasses at home. But you'll see it now. In 1914, unfortunately, is the most famous year for the worst possible event in recent history. And we already know that is the beginning of the First World War, or how they call it, the Great War, which started with the murder of Franz Ferdinand in Sarajevo. But let's move on to some beauteous topics, like also in 1914, the Panama Canal was opened. Until then, the biggest possible technological undertaking, which shortened the route by almost 15,000 kilometers. It is about 18 kilometers long, and ships need 1 day to pass it. So, did you know that already in 1914, the first high altitude rocket was patented, which include the concept of liquid propellant rocket engine that employed gasoline and liquid nitro oxide by his inventor, Robert Goddard. The year 1812 is known in Europe for Napoleon's defeat in Russia. To be more precise, the Napoleon's beginning of the conquest of Russia and retreat in only 5 months. So, where did things go wrong? Napoleon entered Russia with 600,000 soldiers through Poland, promising conquest in just 20 days, although it took him 3 months to enter the Moscow. But he succeeded in that intention solely because of the tactical retreat of the Russians, who, after major battles, had to withdraw their forces to regroup, which was a pretty good idea. After leaving Moscow, the Russians ordered to set fire to all warehouses and supplies that they could not take, as well as many buildings as possible. Napoleon expected that in Moscow they would find large supplies that would help him in a further fight and the possibility of establishing themselves in Moscow as a base for a further attacks on Russians. Anyway, after exactly 1 month, the French left Moscow due to poverty, also due to the impossibility of fortification, due to majority of the burned city, and the forthcoming winter. Less than 2 months later, Napoleon's last soldier is leaving Russia. Of the once great French army of 600,000 men, less than 100 returned. Unfortunately, on the Russian side, there were much greater losses of up to 1 million people, which half of whom were civilian victims. Napoleon had many problems that influenced the defeat in Russia, such as the impossibility of logistics to follow the rapid march of the army. Also, the shaken morale within the army. And the tactics of the Russians, who preferred to retreat at the start in order to regroup, then also burning all their villages and supplies behind them. And of course, one of the most important things is the weather, which was not in Napoleon's favor that year. From the dry, hot summer that set him on his journey, through the winter that drove him out of the Moscow, to the midwinter weather turning above average warm and turning frozen and snowy Russia into the mud. And then again, the return of winter conditions, which was the strongest one in the last 20 years. Although this is more cheerful video, we'll pay attention to a few interesting facts. So, did you know that the most famous French guy was an Italian? Napoleon was born in Corsica, a large island off the coast of Italy. This occurred a year after it became a French territory. While today, Corsicans primarily speak French, with a small percentage of the population speaking Corso, which is an Italian dialect. But during the Napoleon time, this was not the case. During his childhood, the locals spoke either Genoese or Corso. His true name was really Napoleone di Buonaparte, which he changes as a young adult in order to sound more French. No, the Napoleon was not short. The rumor about Napoleon's supposed short stature was originated by English propaganda as a way of embarrassing and diminishing him in the front of whole Europe. They did this by making him comically diminutive in critical cartoons during the Napoleonic Wars. This belief became so resonant that the 20th century psychological term known as short man syndrome has become also known as the Napoleon complex. Today, they believe that he was 5 feet 6 inches tall, which is an average stature for a man of the time period, and one possible misinformation could came from the doctor that noted that at the time of his death he was 5 foot 2 from the top of the head to the heels, which is a French measurement equal to in English terms 5 foot 6. So, you do the math. He would disguise himself and walk the streets of Paris incognito. Sometime after becoming an emperor, Napoleon would occasionally dress in commoner's clothing and walk the streets of Paris incognito. He would engage people in conversation seemingly to ascertain what they thought about him, whether he truly wishes to find out how well he was doing as a leader, or maybe even due to his insecurities. Well, we'll never know. Although the first cowbell was found in ancient China, dated somewhere 5,000 years ago, in Europe, first mentions of cowbell was written in 14th century. In Deutsches Wörterbuch, or German dictionary, which is the largest and most comprehensive dictionary of the German language in existence. And it was written by the Grimm brothers. And this is the original manuscript of the book. And we must mention that the Grimm brothers are best known for writing a fairy tale, Hansel and Gretel. This is called a mini ball. It is a musket, but it's called a mini ball by his author, Claude Etienne Minié, a Frenchman who invented it in 1846. It was first used in the Crimean War in Europe and then in Napoleon Wars. It was most used artillery weapon in the American Civil War, and it's calculated that mini ball has made 90% of total wounds in Civil War. By the late 1800s, it was replaced by the modern bullets as we know today. It was the summer of 1941. German troops had started Operation Barbarossa and they were penetrating very fast inside Soviet countries towards east. A first battle of Kiev, Germans describe it as a major battle of all times. It is the largest encirclement in the history of warfare by number of troops, with more than a million soldiers on both sides. The first line was spread on over 700 kilometers, and on some prime position, there were 2,000 German tanks spread in a line of only 70 kilometers, of course followed by German infantry. You can just imagine the devastation. Fall of Kiev helps Germans to penetrate 750 kilometers into the Soviet Union in just 2 months. Unfortunately, at the end, this is only what it matters. This battle has resulted as one of the biggest loss of people. 130,000 Soviet soldiers killed and almost 500,000 of Soviet soldiers took in captivity, from whom only few of them survived. Only 5% of Soviet soldiers managed to escape the burning Kiev ring and went to Siberia, where the Soviets reorganized and regrouped for liberation actions in next years. In Middle Ages, Christianity was brought closer to people through many ways from their everyday life. So, birds were mentioned in many written examples from that period. Birds can most easily be compared to angels due to the possibility of flying, as well as contact with the heavens. In some examples, the pelican, which could also be on a ring, is mentioned, which, according to some, bleeds itself with its long beak in moments of starvation in order to feed its young with its own blood. Frederick William IV became the King of Prussia in 1840. To please the people, he made major strides in first year, such as easing press censorship, which will still be handy for someone to remember today, right? Releasing political prisoners in order to please the opposition parties. Interesting, right? And he began building romantic buildings, which was top in that years, and which the famous is the Cologne Cathedral, which still adorns the center of Cologne today. And he even donated an island with a castle in his ownership called Fraueninsel, which was a natural habitat for many animals, to the Berlin Zoo, which, with his help, opened its doors a few years later as the first modern zoo in Europe. With all these details, in 1848, the European Spring came, a revolution that first broke out in Palermo in Sicily and spread to all major European cities due to the dissatisfaction of the people on a wider spectrum, due to agrarian reforms, due to a feudal system, high unemployment, and even due to awakening of nationalist feelings in some countries under foreign rule. In Prussia, the liberals came to power with the revolution, and King Frederick managed to stay on the throne with a political spin, but he refused the title Emperor of the Germans that the liberals wanted to give him, considering that they were not a legit government and that with a few more spins they would be overthrown by him. In later years, King Frederick William IV becomes mentally ill, although still in power, so details of the last years of his reign are taken with a grain of salt.